This is the cemetery towards the highland part of the town of Warkworth. Very well maintained. There's a thing about mortality that can trigger a lot of people. But of course, they're laid out like this in memory of those who have passed on. And utmost respect to people who are laying here in peace. I felt compelled to come here because of the part that I got to in the Bhagavad Gita. And of course, being in a Western country where the bedrock is Christianity, most of these would not be Hindu. I've just parked up a bit further down from the cemetery, and I've got the book, the Bhagavad Gita, in front of me. And permit me, in this odd angle, just to talk through a couple of things. So, a recap. Arjuna has been talking to Krishna, who we will later find out is actually God in human form. Arjuna at this time does not suspect that as such. And he has been told he has to fight the people who are ahead of him. And he doesn't want to. And there's a link to the first episode in which I talk about that. And what's interesting is that he says, I will not fight. And Krishna, who then is referred to as the Blessed One, says the following. Wise men mourn neither those whose life breath is gone, nor those whose breath remains. I have never not existed, nor have you, nor have these lords of men, nor will we cease to exist, all of us from now onwards. And Krishna says, know this, that with which all this world is woven is not to be destroyed. No one is able to effect the destruction of the imperishable. The self is not born, nor does it ever die. Unborn, eternal, continuing from the old, the self is not killed when the body is killed. Death is fixed for those who are born, and birth is fixed for those who die. Just as one throws out old clothes and then takes on other new ones, so the embodied self casts out old bodies as it gets other new ones. Now, in a Western perspective, non-Hindu or Sanatana Dharma, the eternal law, certainly Christian, that will cause concern for some people. I understand. I'm not Christian, I'm not Hindu. And certainly the way in which the concept of reincarnation is brought about and talked about in this part of the book, and that's what I'm going to talk about now. This place outside is fast becoming one of my favourite places to record. Bit of a breeze and neutral backdrop. So, the Bhagavad Gita. Let me take my glasses off. I've been reading this as well, and the one thing about All Quiet on the Western Front, or anything to do with war, is that you realise how precious and fragile life is. In the First World War, so many men and women, but specifically men, young, lost their lives. And it was the same in the Second World War, the Korean War, the Vietnam War, any war that you can think of. The Gulf War that I was, well, not involved with. I was at the Navy by then, but I'd spent time in the Gulf when Iran and Iraq were at war together. And it could be taken away from you, your life, at any time. And you become respectful of life. But also, I think, strangely, and this is my own opinion, respectful of death. Because when it comes, for somebody who is in service to their country and it's part of what they sign up for, when it comes, and it does come, you deal with it. So I know people who died in the Falklands War. When I deployed to the Far East and Australasia, 83, 84, we were away for 9 months. And we were told before we deployed, the Admiral came onto our ship, HMS Aurora. We were all lined up on the afterdeck, and he said, look, it's a long time, and in his own experience, because he did this many times, some people aren't going to come back. And we lost somebody who unfortunately passed away in Australia. Accident. And it happens. And I've done enough memorials, military memorials, to know that when people have passed on, you should respect them for that. Now with the Bhagavad Gita, there's a different sensibility when it comes to fighting and death. It's part of what Sanatana Dharma, which we in the West call Hinduism, says is their Dharma. It's their sacred duty. So coming from a non-Hindu tradition background, I am aware that often what is said in this scripture, this book, can really have an impact. It certainly seems to have an impact on some people because our mortality, or the mortality of loved ones, it's difficult because of the sense of loss, sense of grief. So, obviously, approaching this with respect. And I'll be as forthright as I can in terms of what is said here, because it's from a tradition that I don't necessarily share, but I find quite interesting. And in fact, when you read this, and about the idea of death and reincarnation, it's very similar to a lot of ancient philosophy, strangely. Greek philosophy. So, I don't know what to call the thumbnail, but it may be something like, there is no death, stop clinging to life, or something like that. So I think the key aspect of this part of the book, which is the middle part, it is from what is known as the second discourse up until the seventh discourse. Discourse being chapters. And it says here at, I think it's discourse, the second discourse 20. I'm not too sure what to call these breaks. Call them verse. The key is the self is not born, nor does it ever die. So self, in the language in which it was written, possibly Sanskrit for all I know, the ancient times, the English word self I don't think necessarily has the full connotation what was originally meant. It could be a bit confusing as to, I think the self is this, but is this what the ancients meant? So when I read it, the self is not born, nor does it ever die. Are we talking about the soul, our sense of being? I'm not too sure. But what I read into it, as a layperson, is that this book is telling me that my soul has always existed. Okay. It's unborn, so the body's born, but not the self. It's eternal. It's been around forever. It continues from the old. The self is not killed when the body is killed. Can we take comfort from that? Well, yes, because the self is a part of us. Now, whether we, in the modern term, put into it the mind, the soul, a mate of mine says the will and the emotions, all those things that are non-physical. We're in the physical world, the 3D, but part of us, our mind, is not. You can't show anybody your mind, but we know it exists. So, do we take comfort in the fact that if there is the self, and not everybody believes that there is, then it's eternal. It will last after this body, this meat suit, has gone, and it existed before we were ever born. Just as one throws out old clothes and then takes on other new ones. I read this in the car. So the embodied self casts out old bodies as it gets other new ones. Interesting concept. But the self is not readily seen by sight or mind. It is said to be formless and unchanging. So when you have known this, you should not mourn. My wife's father passed away at the back end of year 2000. And everyone, we knew it was coming. He'd been ill for some time. He went in for an operation, did not recover. He was on life support for quite a while. And of course it was down to the family to decide whether to switch off the machine. And we had a conference talk. And his wife, my wife's mother, was a nurse of long standing. And although it was sad, we said, yeah, the body's there, but the soul is left. And we agreed to have the machine turned off. Now, that is not to say it was done cold-heartedly, it was done with a lot of emotion. I felt slightly removed because it was not my father, so I let my wife and mother-in-law lead on that one. They did ask me for my opinion, and I gave it. I agreed it should be turned off. So the mourning period took a while. And I remember a conversation that was had, and my wife came to the realization that after a long time of mourning, and again, anybody who's gone through mourning, I'm not saying that this should have happened in your case, this is my wife's case. And she came to realize, or came to accept in her own mind, who she mourning for. Her father or herself. Because her father had suffered for some time. His pain had gone now. And it was a release for him. And in fact, looking back, he almost said goodbye to us. He knew that he may not come out of the operation. Which we found odd at the time. He said, you know, nice to have met you and see you again. So, you should not mourn. That's quite a difficult thing for people to take on, isn't it? I think it's one of those things that we know that we're going to be born, and it says in here, death is fixed for those who are born, and birth is fixed for those who die. I mean, that's Buddhism to a T, and of course Buddhism came out of Hinduism. And we know it's going to happen. We know it's going to happen to ourselves, but it's not a topic we'd like to face. A lot of people, not everyone, but a lot of people will ignore it for as long as possible. And when it comes, it's a sudden shock. So, take that as you wish. I don't know what the answer is. There's a thing here, it's the second discourse, verse 30. Son of Bharata, so this is Krishna, who we later find out is God in human form, talks to Arjuna, calls him the son of Bharata. The embodied self, he says, which exists in the body of everyone, is eternally free from harm. So you should not grieve for any living beings. For the warrior there can be found nothing greater than battle for the sake of Dharma. The body can be harmed, often is, but the soul cannot, the self. Yeah. And this is where I think this kind of thing will affect certain people to the point they may turn away or carry on. Because this is difficult stuff from the Western perspective. Because we are told other things about the body and the soul. This is, I think, actually the hardest part. And it's okay. So according to Hinduism, Sanatana Dharma, we have the self and we have the body, and we'll have numerous bodies for the self. And we should not mourn death. But also, it says here, let go of clinging, and let fulfillment and frustration be the same. Let them go. For it is said, yoga is equanimity. So part of the Bhagavad Gita is saying, how can you get to know God? And one of them is a route of yoga. There are others, renunciation, and then there is knowledge and study, jnana. But this is talking about we're clinging too much to the body. We have to release it. And then there's a real discourse, really. It's the second discourse, 55 to 57. And it's almost giving instructions. It reads differently to the rest. And it says this, and I think it's worth reading it out in its entirety. When a person renounces all the desires in the mind, all the things that we want up here, that one is said to be content in the self, by the self, and firm in wisdom. Now that is in alignment with nearly all ancient philosophy, and some modern philosophy. The person whose mind is free from anxiety about sorrows, and free from greed for pleasures, free from rage, passion, and fear, it's all gone, whose thoughts are firm, that one is said to be a sage. In other words, a wise person. But boy, how difficult is that? Can you ever reach that stage? Can you fully renounce everything? Is that possible? Because if we have the self in this 3D, and this 3D is full of ego and vanity and wanting needs, can you fully renounce everything for the sake of the soul, the self? And I think that's the eternal dilemma. Is it as easy as it is written here? The person who has no longing anywhere, coming across this and that, pure and impure, who neither loves nor hates, that one's wisdom stands firm. The thing about this type of discourse, this type of scripture, is that, in my mind, it's clear instructions. It's like following a recipe. But how often have you followed a recipe and got the end result exactly as it meant to be? And often we fudge some of the recipe items because we can't find them, or we substitute. And if this is an instruction on how to release oneself from the imperfections of the body and all the issues that come with it, can you do that? Is that possible? Can the body negate itself? I don't know the answer. This is a lifelong pursuit that I've been following. Still confounds me, even having done it for 40 odd years. It's one of those things. This is a further piece to read. Clinging is born to someone who dwells on the spheres of the senses. Why do you cling to life? Because you're enraptured by your senses, your 5 senses. And we know there's more than 5 senses. Desire is born from clinging, and anger is born from desire. Sound a bit like Yoda now. Confusion arises from anger, and from confusion, memory strays. From the fall of memory comes the loss of insight, and one is lost when one's insight is lost. What this is saying in reverse, you are adrift upon the deep, you're lost in life, time's ocean, if you're clinging on to memory, and then old memories like anger, and you're clinging on to the anger because you've desired something, freedom, or I didn't get something as a child and it's eaten away at me all my life, or I think I was mistreated when I was younger and that anger is carrying on my shoulders and I'm clinging to things because I want restitution or something like that. So I don't know if you think this is powerful stuff. I do. I'm just drawn to this. But the person who casts away all desires, who moves away from clinging, who has no idea of mine, and who has no idea of I, the first person pronoun, that one comes to peace. Is it true, do you think, to say that in the West we are conditioned to think of me? But really, it's we. We are separate from other people in our physical selves. But if we do have a self, the non-physical self, soul, that's not separated, because there's no physical boundaries. And it's energy. And energy mixes with energy. So if you're in a room with other people, you're going to feel their energy. And if that energy is bad, you're going to feel down. If that energy is good, you're going to feel lifted. Even though you're not physically touching them. Why do you leave that room feeling either up or down? Because of the other people that's in it. It's energy. And that is different to mind because you're sharing your energy with others. We're all connected with other beings of energy. And energy, light goes around the earth like that. And energy is like light. We're connected with everyone, if I've got this right, on the planet. We're not separate from anyone. But I'm going to go on. I don't want to spend too long getting too deep. So, just a few more things to go through up until the bit I finish, which is the 7th discourse. And there's a little bit about the style of language and a few other points to raise. So in the 3rd discourse, the 37th chapter, it says, "Learn the enemy here on earth." What's this enemy on earth, I want to know? It is desire and anger. They're enemies. There's a couple of Indian words here. I say Indian, I don't know which language it is, whether it's Sanskrit, Urdu, Punjabi, whatever. But the guna of rajas, that is passion. Passion is their source. Each is all-consuming and evil. So, desire and anger are all-consuming and they're evil. In other words, not good. And we all have them. I think in the West we've come to believe partly it's part of being human. We shouldn't, I don't think, shy away from our anger. There's righteous anger. Desire, if you desire peace, is that bad? Well, according to a direct reading of this, possibly. You got to even release that. In the shape of desire, a fire which is always hungry. First reign in the senses. Don't want, just need. I come into being from age to age. This is Krishna now speaking. With the purpose of fixing dharma, sacred duty. As a refuge for those who do good and as a doom for those who do evil. Christianity teaches that Jesus, Yeshua HaMashiach, Jesus the Messiah, is God manifested in form, and therefore follow Jesus and you go to God. It's found exactly the same in Hinduism. But Hinduism has a much older pedigree, heritage, and it has a number of people who, predominantly men I believe, who are said to be Brahman, God in human form. Rama is one. Buddha is accepted as others. And I think some Hindus accept Jesus as being part of Brahman, God. They don't have a problem with that. So from the Hindu mind, if you want to follow any one of those, Buddha, Jesus, Krishna, to God, it's fine. They do not negate that you should only choose one path. So that's interesting. I come into being from age to age. I devote myself to those who resort to me. This is God speaking. In just the same way, people follow my path in all places. Interesting. There's bits about wisdom. With wisdom as the highest goal, controlling the senses, and filled with trust, one reaches wisdom, and so on. And just to finish off, you'll notice that what I've done here, I've said verse, but when I wrote in the notes I said stanza, because I couldn't think of any other word. Each stanza is self-contained but joined by the numbers. They follow on from each other. But individually, on their own, they make sense in themselves, but they have a flow to them. And that's typical of the Bhagavad Gita. And that's where I've got to. So, very challenging. Even from an atheistic's point of view, which I am, I'm an atheist who believes in God. I believe in God, I don't follow any one trajectory of of religion or faith. I study all of them. But they all seem to have a lot in common. And with these, with what, again, we call them Hindus, Hinduism is many schools, and they don't all agree. It's a lazy term. But Hindus, I'll use that because it's well known. And Christianity, I don't think they're in conflict with each other. I've yet to come across any reason to think that they are diametrically opposed. But a lot of people in those faiths may think otherwise. So, I'm happy to see both sides. But because I guess I'm not aligned to any religion, I personally take a lot from this. But I know a lot of Christians will shun it. No, not going there. Because if you strip away any concept of faith, because what the Bhagavad Gita does, it says you should follow me, Krishna eventually, but it doesn't say you should be a Hindu. Hinduism, as far as I'm concerned, is not a religion that tries to get converts. It states that this is the universe, this is the way it works, this is the way it works within us, and it's up to you. You decide whether you're going to agree with it, follow it, or whatever. But I love the challenge that this poses, because I'm not part of that faith. And do I not take anything on board? Well, there's a lot here that I like to agree with. I like to think that we do have a self separate to the body, and so on. But having studied it multiple times, I've not yet come to a decision as to what it fully means. I don't know. So, there you go. That's all I can say about that part, the middle part. I'll read some more and I'll come back and I'll do possibly the last bit, which will be the great revealing of Krishna, if I remember correctly. And report back then. If you've got anything that you'd like to say about this book or what I have said, feel free to disagree, feel free to add your own bit. And also, do you think that there is a connection with other faiths here or none? I'm happy to respond to that. I think it's a great opening to possible debates. But if you've never read it, I would say please do. Because the Maori have a concept that we're all in the same waka. Now a waka is their canoes, big canoes. And everyone has to either row, and there's one person at the front, we would call them a coxswain nowadays, but that's not the Maori word, to choose the direction, but they're all working together. And if one person in that waka is not doing their job, the waka doesn't work. Well, the world, imagine the world as the waka, and we're all in it, and we're all in the same waka. So, ignore certain stuff if you wish, but there's a lot out there to take on, so I would recommend a read. But anyway, that's it for now. Thank you for listening.